What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Valley coming at you without my certified fantabulous co-host, but I have duped Grace Jean of the What's in a Game podcast. Check them out on YouTube and Spotify, and hopefully soon Apple Music. I will include the links to where they're at in the podcast and YouTube description. It is her first time on the podcast, so it's not her fault, even though she listens, so she might know what she's in for a little bit. I'm excited to pick her brain about a bunch of stuff, the Nuggets, the Magic, some other offseason stuff, the finals, of course, game 1, game 2 adjustments, that type of stuff. The biggest question we have, well, first, forgot this, follow Grace on Twitter at Erin Burr 27. That's at ERINBURR 27. So go follow her at the Twitter machine. But the first question we must ask, Grace, and I'm staring at your Twitter handle and I keep wanting to say Erin, but Grace, how the heck are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a solid week. Been missing basketball, but then we got game 1 of the finals, and then I was missing on the offseason gossip, and of course, Woj always delivers when you least expect it. So I'm just swimming in content right now. So I'm doing well.
Yeah, it's about the ramp up. It's where we have finals, but so much of the discourse is about not the finals, which ironically, I'm going to start off by asking you about not the finals. I have to know though, before I ask you about the podcast, in your Twitter bio, you basically single out the Nuggets and the Magic, which I think is one of the most unique. Whenever I've seen multi-team lists in someone's bio, I kind of like can connect the dots. I need to know, what is the genesis of like this Nuggets Magic hybrid interest?
So the Nuggets are my number 1 team. I actually recently got into them, like as in last year during their playoff run. I'm not from Colorado, so I hope the Denver people don't disown me for that. But I got really into the Nuggets following them during the playoff run last year. It was actually the first time that I'd watched the playoffs from sort of round 1. Usually I was a much more casual basketball observer, audience member, whatever. But I actually watched the play-in, and I saw the Pelicans Thunder play-in game. That was really fun. Went down to the wire, all that. Thunder prevailed in that 9-10 game. They played the Wolves and got schmacked. And so I was like, well, I really like this young Thunder team, and I don't like that Minnesota kind of messed them up. So after I had never watched a Nuggets game before, but the Wolves played Nuggets in round 1 last year, and I was like, well, I'm going to root for the Nuggets now because I dislike the Timberwolves for beating up this young Thunder team that I enjoyed watching in this one play-in game. And so, this is Adam Silver propaganda, because he, I think, did a good job drawing me in as a deeper basketball fan with the play-in.
So it was kind of born from a dislike of a team that beat a team that you did like.
Yes, that I liked after watching one game, because I had not watched the Thunder before that
My
play-in game
favorite. I
either.
love that.
Yeah.
And what is the Magic? How do we connect the
Yeah.
Magic?
So I actually grew up in Florida. I was more of a Heat fan because Dwayne Wade was my favorite player growing up, but we definitely watched a lot of the Orlando Magic as well. I was actually born in Orlando. And I was always watching those Dwight Howard teams in the late 2000s and all of that. But actually, since I don't know, became a teenager, I hadn't really watched any of the Orlando Magic, and they haven't exactly been giving me a reason to. But after last year, watching the Nuggets in the playoffs and kind of getting deeper into basketball, I just got really excited about the current iteration with this new young Orlando Magic team. And after just kind of watching them a little bit to start the this last regular season, I just kind of fell back in love with them. And I'm like, well, I'm from Florida and I'm born in Orlando, so I just kind of felt that kinship with them. And after they had that really impressive win streak at the beginning of the season that no one expected because they are so young. And it was really driven by this ridiculously good defense, especially for such a young team. And I actually watched them beat the Nuggets when I was home for Thanksgiving. So that was ooh, bittersweet. to watch, because I was kind of rooting for them a little bit in that game, even though I wanted the Nuggets to win because I just want the Nuggets to win everything. Like they take priority. But it was like, this is just impressive to see this young team doing that, and so I just kind of followed them from there and never really fell off.
That's fucking awesome. I love like how you reached that point of those two teams. But Grant and I had talked about this. This was like, I think, months back, because I've talked to you on Twitter for a while. Do you have you tweet and like you talk like you have a pretty technical basketball background? Because Grant and I talked about how you should be the ones hosting our podcast before What's in a Game even launched, based off some of the interactions I had with you. So is there a background there? And one, what is it? And also two, I guess, like, did you following the Nuggets more and the Magic more, like, did that open up your interest then to the rest? Because you talk about the entire league, like, in such a, like, it's an incredible, you've said things, not that this should be this is actually a really low bar, so I won't use myself as an example, but like you said things that I've just like, I wouldn't even have thought about, or like you're pointing out stuff to me in games and I'm just like, I wish I could notice that in real time. So threw a lot of questions at you there, but so wherever you want to start with it.
Yeah, so I guess I'll try to work backwards. Absolutely, especially watching the Nuggets last year. They're a team that just the way that they operate with Jokic and the way they run their offense and everything, the deeper that you kind of get into like the fandom of that team, it's kind of impossible to not get more into the X's and O's of the game, because they're a team that even in the regular season, a lot of their offense relies on like deploying counters to how like a particular team is defending them. Before last year, I like didn't. It's not that I didn't care about defense, but I didn't know anything about NBA defense. I am actually coming from this, coming at this from a perspective of previously like a very casual NBA fan. I have no technical background in basketball. I watched a lot of NBA YouTube, a lot of film breakdown as the playoffs were going on again last year and throughout this past regular season. And really, it was just born out of a just like hunger to like keep learning more about the game. And it's really, I think, interesting that it's because of a team like the Nuggets, because of the way that they operate, that's sort of like created that hunger, because I wanted to understand more about the team, like what made them so good, that it was impossible to do that without really getting into X's and O's, because of course they have great players as well, which is kind of like how a lot of fans get into the NBA, is like, wow, this one player like can do these amazing things, especially like, you know, different ways of like scoring, getting buckets. But the way that they operate like as a team was very like enticing to me, and I just wanted to know more. And as a result, I got more into understanding defense. Like I care a lot more about defense than I
And
ever
you're a
really
small
thought
ball
I
hater.
would.
When you said that on the one of your segments on the podcast, I honestly, my heart broke a little bit, because I basically exclusively advocate for small ball style, because to call NBA players small when, like, if you're 6'8" and the biggest guy on the court, like, it's still pretty fucking big. But
I mean, not by
anyway,
NBA standards. Not
right.
in today's
Yeah,
NBA,
but like calling the
which
Thunder small ball when Chet's on there and he's like 7 foot is like, all right, well, okay, he doesn't play like a traditional 7-footer, but that's anyway. My
yeah.
soul was crushed when I discovered that you were just anti small ball.
I know, I am, and it's kind of like, you know, JJ Redick hates the dunker spot, but you know, he'll have some exceptions if teams use it right. I actually think, to go to your example of the Thunder, I've talked about this a lot, that there are only two teams in the NBA that I trust to go small ball and play competent basketball. The Thunder are absolutely one of them. They are the number one. The other is the Pacers. But part of that is because they have the personnel at present to, you know, take advantage of that. We don't have to get into a whole like meta discussion about my qualms with small ball though. But yeah, to kind of answer that question about how um why I got into just like a broader, not just that I have an understanding. I don't actually think I understand teams outside of the Nuggets and the Magic all that well, but I have a like hunger, like I said, to just keep learning more about them, and that's how I got into, yeah, following the NBA more at large than I ever had previously.
So you co-host the What's in a Game podcast with your co-host Will Jones. It's become one of my regular listens. I've really enjoyed it since the debut episode. Would you care to elaborate on how that came about and follow them on Twitter at What's in a Game NBA, spelled exactly as it sounds. And like I said, the links to where you can find them will be in the YouTube and podcast descriptions. But would you like to elaborate on how did that come about? Like, how did you, Will, decide to start it? And if you had to just give a little bit of a pitch, because I have heard when people come on that their subscriptions will go up. And I love getting those messages because it reminds me that a bunch of sickos are listening to this podcast. So are you able to, if no one's listened to it yet, I would highly recommend checking it out. But we all know around these parts that my word means very little. So if you could give us the pitch of what's in a game.
Yeah, so Will and I started What's in a Game a couple of months ago, where I came up with the idea. Will approached me on Twitter. He kept saying, like, you should have a podcast. And I'm like, I'm not going to start a podcast. And eventually he said, do you want to start a podcast with me? I'm like, oh, someone else to help me with like all of the work that goes into this? Yeah, let's do it. I really liked his film breakdowns that he would constantly post on Twitter, and I thought that we had a good rapport. So yeah, I decided that we could be a good pairing. And so What's in a Game, the philosophy of the show is really about two basketball fans that are trying to share our perspective on these games and the NBA as a whole. But for me personally, it's really a reflection of my journey in terms of learning more about the game of basketball. And so my goal with each episode is to just kind of help a casual to medium observer of the game. And I really appreciate that you, who is definitely like a higher level watcher of
I think I'm less than
basketball, ball
casual.
knower.
I'm excited to watch my first NBA game on Sunday, game 2 of the finals. It'll be my first one. I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, I'm glad that it can appeal to that audience as well. But it's really about trying to make it as accessible as possible. Honestly, there's so much great content out there. That's how I was able to come to this like deeper uh, level of ball knowing than I did a year ago. But I also wanted to share some of my thoughts and, just kind of point more things out that some of the other NBA YouTubers, may not catch, and also ask questions, right? A lot of the podcast is about asking questions about why a team did a certain thing or did it in a certain way, and trying to, have a discussion to answer that question.
I am ready to talk to you about the Denver Nuggets.
Okay.
Are we ready to get into them? I don't know. Their fans, I'm sure, are in very much off-season mode at this point because that's what they are. I wanted to start. You had kind of recently talked about this on your podcast. Where are you at with Jamal Murray? I know he was injured during this postseason run. I know inconsistency's kind of been ingrained into his DNA, even like during his best moments. There's also, you and Will were talking about what I found interesting and missed is the comments maybe that Michael Malone had about, but then corrected himself about everyone needs to be in the gym and work on their stamina. But you think maybe we're aimed at Jamal Murray?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the question was about Jamal, so
I had no idea until I listened to the clip because I didn't even see that. But look, he's had some amazing playoff performances. He's hit some incredible shots, including against the Lakers in the playoffs this year. But I'll lay it like this in case people want to get mad. I'm starting to wonder whether there's a certain dependency on Nikola Jokic that's almost uncomfortable because their synergy is great, but can you depend on this player to be a high level borderline star independent of Nikola Jokic?
yeah, I mean, this is a very good point. I'm a huge fan of Jamal Murray. He's a big part of the reason that I got into the Nuggets. I love Jokic. He's my favorite player, but Jamal's my second favorite player. And while I have all of these new questions, really, and I think a lot of Nuggets fans do, about whether he can, come into a season condition, start to perform a lot better in the regular season than he has, and not sort of try to play his way into shape before the playoffs, and that didn't work out this year. Whether he can improve his consistency both in the regular season and the playoffs, because like you said, even at his peaks, that inconsistency is sort of ingrained in him. But outwardly, I'm still on the Jamal is better than your favorite player train. So if you, find me on Twitter, like I will sort of, no, I will kind of defend him to the death. Actually, like Jamal had a decent regular season this year. He, a lot of Nuggets fans pointed out how he had improved his playmaking by a lot, especially his playmaking with Jokic. Like that chemistry just kind of kept getting better and better as the years went on. And everyone thought that, the playoffs last year was the peak of that, but it had started to carry over and they were building on that to start the season. But he also improved his shooting efficiency, especially on his pull-up threes. That's like a really big thing on a team that doesn't take that many threes, even when they're, clicking offensively. But he couldn't stay on the floor. And so his season kept getting interrupted. His progress kept getting interrupted because of hamstring, shin splints. He had the calf strain in the playoffs. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse. I don't think it is, because the conditioning and health questions have been a consistent concern with him, and a lot of what those comments from both Malone and Calvin Booth at that end of season press conference were about challenging Jamal to take those things more seriously in a conscious way, especially as he, gets older. He's in his prime right now, but he's going into what will be his age 28 season. And Calvin Booth made these comments about how Jamal should, study what championship level guards of the past did after their championship seasons, because they did have a short off season last year following winning the finals. And you kind of cut everybody some slack for coming in with maybe less than ideal conditioning, et cetera.
Mhm.
But it has been this consistent concern with Jamal in particular, even before the title run. So the one sort of, I guess, summary that I would have of this is that it's not that I trust him to just kind of get better at these things. I think they're legitimate questions that he needs to answer, and he needs to show us now that he can be, let's say, 80% of the player that we want him to be, particularly in the regular season, because I do think that he needs to take that more seriously to take some pressure off of the rest of the team. But if he can't, it does change the conversation about how you build this team, because the team is built around Jamal and Jokic being superstar level, at least in the playoffs. Jamal was not that in the playoffs this year, and he hasn't been that in any regular season. And the starters are sort of paid accordingly. So if he's not going to perform to that level, it changes the calculus about how the rest of the roster is constructed to make up for that.
I just can't. I keep going back to, so this would be my question to you. When you look at how much they've struggled historically when he plays without Jokic, and even this season, they were obliterated in his sample without Jokic. His effective field goal percentage was below 50 during those minutes. I think the Nuggets were hammered by like minus 15 points per 100 possessions. Is that is that something that we can legitimately start clinging to, or is it more about, well, the samples are so tiny in part because of the way Michael Malone prefers to stagger his lineups, and is that something that needs to be further investigated, rather than saying, well, why hasn't Jamal Murray been able to lift up the Nuggets, independent of Nikola Jokic more?
Yeah, so I actually think it's a combination of the two, because when you look at, I was thinking about this the other day when I was having a discussion with somebody about playing with if Jokic could play with another top 15 player. And I thought about the top 15 players who are not their like franchise guy, like first team All NBA MVP caliber the dude on their team. And I'm like, how consistent are these second options actually? And are they good enough to lift up a second unit that is entirely composed of bench players,
Mhm.
like these particular on-off splits are suggesting when it comes to Jamal? I do think that he can be better, and in particular, a better leader for those units, not necessarily as the primary scoring option, but because of the way that the team is constructed, he's often not playing with four offensive players. They're all very offensively limited, especially this past year when it comes to the younger players with Christian Braun and Peyton Watson. We did have Julian Strawther in the rotation for a bit. But I do think it's a combination of the two. And the theme of let's try to stagger these lineups. Let's do a little bit of what, say, the Boston Celtics do, where they have a really expensive starting lineup. They have is it 4 starters that make over $30 million a year, including Jalen Brown, who's on the Supermax now, and Tatum is about to be. But they stagger them a lot more. And what you end up with is a situation where you have at least 2 starters on the floor with the bench players, and the bench players can kind of play off of them and maybe augment what they do, instead of the one starter being put in a situation where they have to kind of carry a unit that is either challenged on one end of the floor or the other. So it's not like the Celtics have a particularly defensively skewed second unit like the Nuggets do with their guys. So the questions are a little bit different, but I think it's really about like, okay, we have this really expensive starting lineup and they're really, really good together, and that's great. But can we start to deploy some of those resources in a way that sort of smoothens out the on-court impact,
Mhm.
whether Jokic is on the floor or not?
This is all to say I would still give him the 4 years, $208.5 million extension that he's eligible for, especially with the cap.
And they probably will.
Yeah,
That's
I mean,
how
they
they've.
should. They don't really have your alternative does not look great. So he's always been a polarizing player for me. Another polarizing player, especially after the playoffs. We had a lot of people in our mentions in our YouTube comments calling for the Nuggets to trade Michael Porter Jr. I don't
That's
think they would
every
get.
year. They did it
Yeah,
last year too.
well, I was really impressed with what he did during the playoffs last year, and even at points this year. I don't think they would get a lot for him, just because I don't think he is yeah, he's made improvements as a defender, as a rebounder at times, but there just hasn't been a ton of strides offensively, it feels like, in large part because the Nuggets aren't necessarily set up that way. And there's a level of concession being made here of, okay, well, he fits into this role. But at the same time, it's like, it'd be great if they could have a third player on this team who can break down defenses and put them in rotation when they're in the half court. And that's not him, I want to say, yet. But are we at the point where you're concerned that I was looking this up in preparation of the podcast? In the minutes without Jokic this season, and I know that most of his baskets come off assists, but he made 14 unassisted baskets without Jokic on the floor this season. Like, that just seems super low. Is there room to experiment more with him, maybe generating his own looks or playing more complicated offense in those micro stretches? Or do you not view him as the type of player that is even worth trying to do that with?
I definitely think that there are things that both the team and MPJ could do to improve his game. Now, you could say there's a limitation on what his ceiling could be in terms of on-ball creation. But the way that the Nuggets run their offense, and could run their offense even with Jokic off the floor if they were to make some of these changes, means that you can run more things for MPJ. I mean, Michael Malone talked about running a bunch of ATOs for Julian Strawther throughout the first half of the season when he was in the rotation. And MPJ can come off of wide pin downs more, try to play make off of those, make more shots, get downhill more for sure. I do think that part of what happens is that MPJ plays a lot of his minutes with Jokic. So I don't think he has a bunch of opportunities to play with the bench. And I would like to see that change. Actually, Calvin Booth alluded to this in an interview that he did last year, right before preseason. I believe it was in a piece with Sportscada, and he went on a whole sort of diatribe about MPJ. And one of the things that he suggested is that he staggers more with the bench. And I actually like a lot of those looks, especially because defensively he can really help with their rebounding. That unit is really undersized as currently constructed. But also offensively, it's not like you have to rely on him for on-ball creation. He can set ghost screens. He can slip, and depending on however a bench unit of the opposing team is guarding them, he can probably add a lot more to his off-ball game. And he did this season add more than we'd seen from him last year, which was the year coming off of the third back surgery. So he actually made a lot more progress than I think people expected, at least in the regular season. He was getting downhill more. His mid-range game improved dramatically. He was not a good mid-range shooter last year, and he, I believe, was second in the league in shooting in the mid-range, like 55% behind Chris Middleton this season. So I actually do think that there are facets that can be explored that don't rely on him improving his on-ball game, and it's really about the team being willing to get a little bit more creative with how they run their offense. I think particularly in those bench units, because it's not like well, they can't get any worse. So let's just try shit.
Do you think that we then could see that, especially when you look at the extent to which even Michael Malone came out and said, well, our starters look gas. And I'm not saying experimenting more with MPJ is necessarily going to be good for his stamina, but if you can get more creative with MPJ during minutes, maybe where Jokic isn't on the court, is there a point where you can either rest players more down the stretch because you were a better, more balanced team, or maybe Nikola Jokic is able to log fewer minutes? Or is this more of a wholesale zooming out and you're looking at the overall depth of the roster? But like, is it like, I would probably lean more towards the latter when you just look at how dependent they're going to be on still guys that are developing. But do you see this team, given what they've talked about and acknowledging Michael Malone specifically, their weaknesses? Like, okay, could we then get, what is it going to be? Michael Porter Jr.'s sixth season next year, seventh season? Like, I know he's missed a ton of time, but like, we're getting into the meat and potatoes of his career and haven't really seen a lot of the stuff that you've necessarily been talking about that they could do in theory with him.
No, I agree, and I think it's both. It's not just zooming out. I actually do think that MPJ could be part of sort of unlocking more viable staggered units, particularly in the regular season. And you talk about how, like, well, wait, wouldn't that just increase his minutes load? The thing is, like, you don't want to throw four of them out there, but you could throw one other starter and like three random dudes out there with Jokic, and that unit's going to be like very positive for like not no reason, but for all the reasons that are Nikola Jokic, right? So if you find a way to use the other starters to help lift up these non-Jokic minutes, then you're not going to be consistently blowing leads and then having to play all of the starters deep into games against the Brooklyn Nets or the Washington Wizards or the Toronto Raptors for no reason. And once you build up the wins, and then down the stretch, like, you don't have to worry about seeding as much and don't have to play the starters, 3/4 of a game against the Memphis Grizzlies in game 82, the like hospital Memphis Grizzlies, right? But I also think that, just to kind of touch on all of Malone's comments during this offseason have been very much about the fact that the starters were gassed at the end of the year. And yeah, part of that is because they just played too deep in the year trying to push for that one seed when they didn't really, need to. And I don't know that they're going to be prioritizing top seeding as much going forward. I mean, they had home court advantage in round 2 and lost game 7 at home, right? But they also demonstrated that they could win on the road at a really a high level in the playoffs. Like, they went into Minnesota and won 2 games when they were down 0-2, and that was really impressive to me. And they also, won a road game against the Lakers, etc. Like, I don't think that this is a team that needs home court advantage to, win a series. And I think they need to be healthy, they need to be rested, and they need to be playing their best basketball. Um, and so finding the way to get to that point by the time the playoffs start is probably going to be more of the priority going forward.
When you look at how, and I do think there was an overreaction after they lost, because one, the Timberwolves are really fucking good. And they could very well be they could run it back as is, re-sign or extend Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, and they could just win the title next year. Like, that's absolutely on the table. But if your impressions of what they have in place changed at all because of not necessarily how the season ended, but because of all the things that you've talked about, where especially you're talking about the starters looking too gassed and kind of looking at, and maybe this is more of a question of, have your impressions changed? Or I don't even necessarily know where you were at originally on this sort of multi-era timeline that they were trying to juggle to hit on these cost-controlled youngsters that can, in theory, extend their title window. Have your impressions of just where the Nuggets are at right now and maybe what they need immediately rather than long-term, have those changed at all?
Those impressions haven't changed actually in the slightest. I was talking to another Nuggets fan about this. I think it was like the day after Game 7 or something, where, you know, Calvin Booth, the general manager, and Josh Kroenke said in the preseason at preseason media that this sort of two timelines plan would probably mean that this past year would be the toughest year that they had to win the title. And I said, like, okay, they got their gap year. Now they need to deliver. Like, these young guys that Cal drafted need to get ready and be like viable, in Malone's eyes, playoff rotation ready dudes, because Peyton Watson didn't play. Julian Strawther didn't. He had the knee injury midseason, et cetera. So that's one of the things that has to happen, is that the young guys that have already been drafted need to be playoff rotation ready, because we're not going to get high quality vets at this point because of the situation with the cap sheet. I actually do think that Justin Holiday played a lot better in the playoffs than I thought he would, particularly in the first half of that Wolves series when the Nuggets were dropping games, but like blowing them away in these bench minutes. They were losing the starters minutes. He played incredibly well. And I actually don't think the bench minutes were like the reason that they lost that series.
No, weren't the
But
starters gobsmacked?
they
They're
were completely like destroyed in the starters minutes, and part of that is because of how well like Minnesota, I wouldn't say like has their number, but it was a combination of that is a tough matchup for the Nuggets starters. And they're like incredibly good starting five, but Minnesota constructed a team that just makes what they do so well very, very difficult. And the fact that they were gassed, and the fact that Jamal was injured, and the fact that nobody could shoot, um, just made it. It was just everything compounding. And then on top of that, you weren't going to have somebody off the bench come in and save you, except Justin Holiday for a couple games. He tried, but they lost them anyway.
When you look at the youngsters, but I mean, and they're not the inexperience on their roster. You're talking Jalen Pickett, Hunter Tyson, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson, Christian Braun. Let's start here. Who is the most important of that? I know Christian Braun is the best one right now, but is he also the most important to this team long term of that group?
Now, Peyton Watson's the most important long term. Christian Braun. So when you say most important, I think like what needs to happen with Christian Braun. Like, he could stay the way that he is, and like the team like would be fine, because if nothing else, he's going to be either a valuable rotation piece for us, or like just a viable rotation piece for another team, and he could be a good trade chip potentially down the line. Peyton Watson is the one who has the biggest long-term upside. I know, like, last year, 2 years ago, a lot of people were sort of comparing him to like, he could be our Kawhi Leonard, and the way that Kawhi sort of extended the Spurs championship window, depending on whatever it is that he develops into. I think his defensive upside is sort of solidified. Like, we kind of know, like, he's just going to be a beast defensively, both on ball and off ball. He can be incredibly impactful. And so the questions are about his offense. And that's going to mean like him sort of reaching the 60th percentile plus outcome of the spectrum of things that fans have envisioned for him is going to determine how much longer the Nuggets championship window is, unless we just like find another random sleeper in the back half of the draft, because this team is not a team that's ever going to end up in the lottery. Like Malone would literally never allow it. And in addition to that, it's a smaller market. Like it's just harder to get really top end free agents, and a big trade would require trading a starter. And because of the way that our starting five is currently constructed, no individual starter outside of Jokic, who is absolutely untouchable, is
I'm about to title this podcast 5 Nikola Jokic trades the Nuggets should consider them.
Yeah, let's do it. No individual starter is going to sort of yield anything near that value, right? And so I do think that the 2 timelines plan is sort of like what needs to happen. And it's not just because they're a small market, but also because of the new CBA. You know, I was listening to Adam Mares and Wes Goldberg talk about this, how the new CBA actually allows for rookie scale contracts to be extended with a 5-year extension now. And that was sort of like one of the trade-offs that's in there. Like, okay, we're making it harder for the top end stuff to happen in terms of trades, free agency deals to happen, especially for contenders. But, you know, you'll be able to keep your younger guys longer term if you happen to do that, right? And Wes made this point about how like college and the NBA are flipping, because now all of these college teams, they have all these one and done players that end up going to the NBA, but also the transfer portal means that there's a lot less continuity on all these college teams than there had been before. And so now the NBA is moving toward like continuity more, sort of forcing contenders to either like go with continuity, or you just won't be able to afford your team, and
So
or
you're saying
it'll
the
just
Lakers are the more stable option for Jan Hurley than UConn. Is that where this is headed?
Oh my gosh, man, that situation is such a mess. But yeah, it's kind of like, well, this is just what has to happen. So I don't think there's an option to not go 2 timelines. Like, we need this to work, and we need to develop these young guys into players that will be viable playoff rotation players, but also guys that can help us in the regular season to make sure that the starters don't get burned out.
Who intrigues you most long-term, or even looking ahead, maybe is most likely to make a difference next season from the Julian Strawther, Hunter Tyson, Jalen Pickett trio? And I feel like the answer is easy, but I'm hoping that you might have an offbeat answer, because I kind of find myself like maybe unhealthily intrigued by Jalen Pickett.
I was going to say, I think everyone expects me to say Strawther, but I'm going to say Jalen Pickett. There are a lot of questions about him because Malone didn't play him much last year. I think he was in the actual rotation like 2 or 3 games for like 2 to 5 minutes a piece. And there were times when he had opportunities because of all of the injuries that Jamal had throughout the season. Reggie Jackson was backing him up, but one of the two-way players, Colin Gillespie, sort of jumped him in that pecking order. I think a large part of that is because Malone trusts Gillespie more. He had been on the team the year before, but maybe it's because Pickett's bad. But also maybe Pickett was fine. The times that I saw him on the floor in the rotation, I thought he played just fine next to Jokic. Runs pick and roll pretty well, whatever. Needs to work on the shooting. That was a big emphasis for the team, I'm sure. The G League film looks how it looks. The questions are like, can he deal with NBA athleticism on both ends of the floor? We don't really know that because he hasn't gotten enough run. And so if he is viable, that's big, because that means we don't have to worry as much about the backup point guard role. I do think that the team could use a little bit more ball handling overall, though, but part of that's going to come from development from guys like Christian Braun, Julian Strawther, Peyton Watson. But we need a point guard, and we don't have one. So if he can be one, that's big. So that would be my answer.
I'm happy that's your answer. I hope they do give him more run next season, but then that also means that they didn't. And this is my next question for you. If I'm to tell you that they're able to get, maybe someone wants to ring chase with them on the veteran, because all they can offer is minimums, assuming I'm just penciling in KCP to come back. If they try and sell us on Christian Braun being ready to take those minutes or Peyton Watson, I'm going to call bullshit. So I'm assuming he's going to come back. They'll only have minimums to offer, or they can look at moving number 28 before it's a salary in that sweet spot where it's not a future pick, but it's also not a salary, attach it to Zeke Naji, and they're able to get somebody that has to make the same amount or less. What is the biggest need for them? Like looking at, they need a few things, but what would be the one, if they could address one need, what would be your druthers there?
So everyone talks about backup ball handler / point guard and also backup center. I would 100% prioritize backup center over everything. Those second units need a solid rotation level veteran scaffold to help those young guys have something to go to. Zeke Naji has not been
I will
what the
not
Nuggets
listen
need.
anymore. It's been
Center.
every season. They're talking about this is the Zeke. I will not listen to any more
Year Zeke
Zeke
Naji.
Naji hype coming from the Nuggets.
My problem isn't that Zeke Naji can't like be the things that all the Zeke Naji stands maybe think that he can be, but it's not going to be on this team. It's not what this team needs. We need a backup center who can set screens and or be some kind of roll
Rebounder,
threat
maybe.
or lob threat. The screen setting is so big because no one in our second unit can really create their own separation. We're not like good, isolation team, right? But also the rebounding. Those second units are really good at, rim protection, but they can't grab a defensive rebound to save their lives. And part of that is because they are undersized. Zeke Naji is an undersized center, but also you had units where Peyton Watson is playing the 4. And so if we had a more viable option there, it just raises the floor for those second units by a lot more. So that would be my answer in terms of like, this is what we need for the regular season. I do think that there's a reasonable argument for backup ball handler to be more important in terms of creating playoff versatility. But I actually think that making sure we can get to that point where the starters are just totally refreshed and all of that, like they could have made it through that Wolves series if they had been, better at like not being completely gassed in the second half of the game where they were up 20. But they can't get through the regular season with they can't get there without a solid option off the bench to help spell Jokic that doesn't involve Aaron Gordon playing more minutes of backup 5 in the regular season, because he and Jokic, I think, were the most they had the biggest burden because of that throughout the regular season. And I think that that's the reason that they looked the most gassed throughout the playoffs. It wasn't just in the Wolves series either. We gotta rest our big guys a little bit more.
I would normally, my view would be that because you have Nikola Jokic, like I don't care as much about the backup 5, but this is not like a Joel Embiid situation where you can kind of pencil Jokic in for between 30 and 50 games of rest every single year.
Right.
So if you can have somebody who is capable, and especially because they don't have the resources to get stupid, where it's like, well, let's give up a first round pick for a backup center. That the combination of, maybe there's a night where we can just force Jokic to rest and play this, not DeAndre Jordan at center. But you mentioned the Aaron Gordon thing, I think is huge. That's also part of the reason I think they missed Jeff Green a little bit, is just that when you look at the minutes that Gordon played as the de facto center, those went up this year. And also just like the assignments he had during some of the like those bench units, like he was just guarding bigger players a lot of the time, it felt like. And so I'm assuming that creates wear and tear. So I would agree with you that if they could get a capable backup center, that might go a longer way at this point than if we can get veteran X to come in and soak up some of the reps behind Jamal Murray instead of a Reggie Jackson or testing out Jalen Pickett.
Yeah. And I think that, again, having just like a screen setter would help the offense of the other guys a lot more, because they can't, I don't know, whatever, experiment with their games or have any confidence to like do something with the ball when they can't create any separation from their defenders, because they're not isolation players. The guys that we draft, the guys that we sort of build, use to build this team around Jokic. And that's like, they play well with Jokic because he's a good screen setter and a good passer. But the screens are like a really underrated part of what just makes those units successful. I think that the fact that Jokic is like kind of peak at all the basic center things that makes those lineups so successful. So.
I will never stop trying to trade Nick Richards to the Nuggets. If anyone,
I'll take that.
Although they had tatted up Jokic, and then Isaiah Hartenstein went on and had he wasn't tatted up at the time, but they had soon to be tatted up Jokic, and they let him go.
I asked other Nuggets fans, like, what was the deal with this guy? He's like, he couldn't stop fouling and like he couldn't catch the ball. And I'm like, but look at his floater. Was that there? Maybe it wasn't.
He's also got a 3-point shot that I don't think Tibbs will ever let him experiment with, but that's neither here. He's about to get paid. That's going to be Knicks need to worry about that a little bit if they can't keep him. Anything else about this team that we didn't touch on that you would just like to discuss before we move on to some Magic talk?
Yeah, I mean, there's been a little bit of conversation about whether the Nuggets offense is like too organized. I tend to think that there's like a little bit of something there, especially watching, say, the contrast between how the Mavericks played the Wolves and how the Nuggets looked against them. In the games that the Nuggets looked the best, especially the starters, was when they were super decisive in their offense, ball was moving, and when a guy was the play finisher, there was no hesitation to like take the shot, make or miss. I think the Mavs and the Pacers have a lot of freelancing in their offenses. You see how much issue that ended up giving the Celtics in the Eastern Conference Finals in that incredibly close 4-game sweep. I do think that like there's a question of like, is it because we lack confident players because our players are so young off the bench in particular? I think part of the frustration with how the Wolves series went, a lot of people were like, why was Christian Braun hesitating on a lot of his shots? The thing with Justin Holiday was he was ready to let that bad boy fly, make or miss whenever he got the ball. A lot more misses toward the back half of that series than makes. But in the first half, it was great. And he was making everything. And we're like, yes, somebody who will take a shot. Love it. But I do think that there can be more room, like we talked about with MPJ. Like there's room to experiment a little bit more with all of the different players in the roster so that we're not overly reliant on the Murray Jokic 2-man game. And this is something that I think a lot of Nuggets fans are talking about this offseason.
It's funny that at point, I mean, it felt like a lot during the playoffs that offense was the bigger issue for the Nuggets. It'd be an interesting,
which no one would have expected.
Although going up against the Wolves, a team that we received pushback from Timberwolves fan when we said it, like they were built in the image of beating the Nuggets. Like that's just a fact at this point. But the Orlando
Will disagrees, by the way, but
that they were built to beat the Nuggets.
Yeah, he hates that narrative.
Is it because they had some of those players before, like the Nuggets were this version of the Nuggets and Tim Connolly were there? That's a lot of the.
He like doesn't want to give Tim credit, but we don't have to dive into that too deeply. I just wanted to say that to annoy him.
Oh man, I will say, I can't remember who tweeted this, but for Tim Connolly to play, I'll phrase it this way as to not anger Will or anybody else, to play such a big role in building what became the championship core of the Nuggets and then building what turned out to be their kryptonite. Someone tweeted like using that exact phrasing. I found it hysterical. But the Orlando Magic, a team that I'm prepared to scold if they're not super aggressive this offseason, because I think that they're at that point where they're good enough to act that way. But before we kind of get into the offseason machinations, I have questions about a couple of their current players. For you, what do you view as the next frontier functionally for Paolo Banchero?
Shot selection. Is he still leading the playoffs in mid-range field goal percentage, by the way?
That's not something I know off the cuff.
He was absolutely sensational in the playoffs, and mid-range shots just become more valuable with the way the defenses operate, and that's all fine and dandy. But I do think that his decision-making overall, not just the shot selection, needs some work. He really does have incredible vision. And some of the passes he makes, I'm like, wow, where'd that come from? But then you look at his assist to turnover ratio and you're like, wow, you like gave it to the other team almost as often as you made these incredible passes to your teammates. I do think that being more decisive with either not with the shots, but with the getting off the ball when he can, like defenses are constantly loading up on him, right? And just sort
Yeah.
of trusting his teammates to make the next pass instead of trying to create that kill pass by holding onto the ball too long is a big part of the next phase of his development. Um, but I actually think that one of the really encouraging things, like I talked about the shot selection, but one of the really encouraging things about seeing Powell in the playoffs is from game one, he was the player on the Magic that was the most comfortable with the level of physicality that the Cavs were bringing to defensively, and he didn't shy away from that, even though he's known as like this, like, oh, he's always taking these middies. But I think that the criticism of that shot selection is a little bit different than some of the other wings that we sort of ding for not using their physical tools as much to create higher value shots. I think that it's not about him like shying away from physicality at all. Like it's more about like reading the floor a little bit better. But when he does have those opportunities, he does take them. Like one of the things I really want to see the Magic do more is finding ways to get Paolo on the move. And not just in transition, but also in semi-transition in the half court, by letting him operate a little bit more off ball, because he is like a devastating downhill athlete when he can attack off the catch, because he's 6'10", 249 pounds and plays power forward. He's going to have a physical advantage on basically every single night because of how big the Orlando Magic play.
Yeah, there's like, I've said it before, a balletic brutality to the way he plays. Like there's force and finesse there. I would kill. I believe in the step back. We've kind of seen hints of it during his first few seasons. I believe in it, like from the 3-point
The
range.
shot
Like,
looks good.
yeah, and I think I just want to see him. And I'm reticent to say NBA. I want to see him with NBA spacing. I want to see him with NBA shooters because I actually want to give Jamahl Mosley credit. Orlando's spacing isn't terrible. It's just that defenses don't give a fuck about the players who are spacing the floor for them. Franz Wagner, though, footwork is still it's basically basketball porn when you look at like what he's able to do with his footwork and has these moments. Is there any cause for concern though? After like this year, he was sub 30% on jumpers, and he had some like lows this
The
year. It
jumper
felt
is
like
so bad, and it's from like everywhere on the floor too. One of the things that caught my attention earlier this season was when he went on JJ Redick and he was talking about how he was trying to improve his efficiency with his shot selection. He was taking less mid-range jumpers overall and all of that. And I did see a lot of hesitation from him, both on the 3-point shot and on the mid-range jumper. First of all, the shot like looks a little bit cooked. So he needs to like work on the form and the consistency of all that in contrast to Paolo. Not that either of them is like a great 3-point shooter, but Franz was shooting 29% on the threes in particular. But I think the hesitation on the shot is a problem and maybe stems from the fact that he doesn't have a consistent form that he feels confident going to. But I think that the mid-range shot, both the sort of longer floaters and the jumpers, are just very, very bad. And I think part of it is because he tried to cut them out of his game. And so he's not as comfortable taking them, or he's like on a given possession thinking like, we don't want a mid-range shot. We don't want a mid-range shot. We don't want a mid-range shot. I want to get something close to the basket or try to create a three. And I think that that hesitation ends up making it so he's either out of rhythm or gives the defense an opportunity to recover more to the jumper, whether it's in the mid-range or the three. Not that anyone is jumping out to contest the 3-point shot right now. That's a problem. So I'm concerned, but I'm not concerned. I'm just like, well, these are things you have to work on, but it's not that I don't think he's capable. And I think he's a very smart player as well. Like you said, the footwork is it's so good. I saw him like close out the Nuggets when I watched them play Orlando earlier in the season. And it was just like, oh no, he's cooking everybody in isolation. Like his ISO footwork is like so good. I do think that he could lean into physicality a little bit more. He is also like 6'10", not quite 250 pounds or whatever Paolo is right now. But but he's also like very big, and I think he could play a little bit more bully ball and not rely too much on the footwork to create exactly the right angles, exactly the angles that he wants on his little push outs and floaters. I think he can bully a little bit more and continue to work on his finishing, because he is a very big, very athletic player when he wants to play that
bounce
way.
off his shoulders when he wants to play. I feel like he did it better. Maybe I'm curious if you agree. I feel like he did a better job playing physical like earlier in his NBA career than we kind of saw from him this season. I felt like we saw more of those kind of like bullish, oh, those dudes just went flying off of Franz Wagner. And I don't
yeah, like when it happens, I'm like, oh yeah, he's huge. So I think he's capable of playing big, and I wouldn't say he like shies away from physicality, but I think he relies too much on trying to create crafty angles when he could really just kind of like bulldoze people sometimes. And it really shows, like, we're talking about his jumper, but like defensively, the fact that Franz is 6'10" really shows up when he tries to guard like a really good player one-on-one. Like, I thought he did a really good job on Paul George for like most of this. This ended up being a clutch game against the Clippers that they lost earlier this year, and Paul George hit this ridiculous shot over Jonathan Isaac. But defensively, the fact that Franz is so like fleet of foot opens up so many ridiculously jumbo lineups for the Orlando Magic. And if there's anything to their team identity, it is we play big all the time, you know, for better or worse, right? Especially when it comes to their offense. But I do think that Franz has more things that he, you know, can work on, particularly with the shot. But if it gets there, it's like he's such a smart player that the ceiling could be insane.
Jalen Suggs used to be a siren song, but now I don't have to defend him as such because he's just like, he's good in a vacuum.
Oh my God.
What have you kind of made of his progression over the past couple years?
I really was kind of skeptical about how his playmaking in particular translate to the NBA. I think he had to play too much at point guard for a team that is, you know, so young and so needs to work on their aggregate decision making, that it didn't sort of translate to helping the aggregate decision making of those lineups overall. But he has some like crazy flashes of like transition playmaking and finding guys on cuts that are really like enticing to those of us who follow these like young NBA players that are, you know, just trying to make a name for themselves. But I think the biggest leap that he took this season was obviously the shooting, because not just because the efficiency improved dramatically, but the number of attempts. He does not hesitate on that shot, and I love to see that for a team that sorely needs somebody to be willing to shoot the ball. In the playoffs, that efficiency did not translate, but the shot volume was still there. He was taking almost 7 attempts a game, only shooting 29%, but you know, that's just kind of how it went. They still took the Cavs to 7 games, their first time in the playoffs. So and a lot of that had to do with his defense, which, what a wrecking ball of a guard. He made second team All NBA, but I actually would have had him first team.
I can't remember if I had him on first team.
Or not NBA, all defense rather.
I was surprised he didn't get more first team love. I can't remember. I think I had him on my fake first team ballot. But sorry, I was surprised he didn't get more.
I knew that the bigs would get a little bit more love given the positionlessness of it all. But I thought if there was going to be one guard there, it really should have been Suggs. And I love Derek White. Like, I think he's no longer the most underrated player in the NBA because everyone knows that he's awesome now. But Jalen Suggs was an absolute wrecking ball on defense. His energy too, just what it does defensively for the rest of the players on the floor, just making everybody play harder. And he's just such a menace. And you're like, how does this guy have this motor as a guard who plays this hard defensively? It just feels kind of unreal. And I don't know if it's going to like continue on throughout like the rest of his career, but right now he's like a scary perimeter defender to try to go up against if you're a guard, right?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say enough good things about his defense and the strides he's made offensively. Like, yeah, you mentioned the playmaking too. Like, he really increased. I thought he did a better job decision making on his drives this year too. And you mentioned the 3-pointer,
because he's willing to score now, whereas he was constantly willing to pass and like just turning the ball over like the rest of the Orlando Magic. But he's willing to, like, especially in semi-transition. Like I loved seeing that in the playoffs. Like he's like, I'm pushing pace. We're getting downhill, and I'm either going to kick out or I'm going to get something good for myself at the rim.
The semi-transition stuff is fascinating with this team because I think they were 7th or whatever it was in transition frequency, but you watch them and it doesn't
you're so young and so athletic. Why don't you play a little bit faster?
Right. They were and this I know just because it actually angers me as someone who has no attachment to this team. They were 29th in average offensive possession time. And when you're also 7th in transition frequency, but that's still your average offensive possession time, is that like where you look at it like I don't even know if a true conventional floor organizer, like that feels like more of a philosophical approach than it has anything to do with their personnel. Is there anything I'm missing there?
I think it's a combination of both. I do think that there have also been transition possessions where I watched them like turn the ball over 3 times in a row because they're just making like wild passes to each other trying to get the ball up the floor and like whatever. And I'm like, oh, this is why they play slow. Okay, I get it. Like Jamal's probably trying to like slow these boys down, make sure they have a good possession and whatever. So that's the philosophical part. But I think that they would do that less, and maybe Jamal would sort of urge them to do that less because he's a very like hands-on play calling coach. Like he's basically telling them what to do almost every time down the floor, which makes sense. They are so young and so turnover prone. But if they had a more reliable floor organizer, they could get into things faster, and also Jamal would sort of trust that more than who they've got out there now. Because like I said, Suggs was playing a point guard for most of the year, whether Fultz was healthy or not, because he ended up starting off the bench. Yeah.
I'm obligated to ask this because this is a national NBA podcast. Is there a chance that Jalen Suggs has kind of like usurped Franz Wagner in the, when you're trying to scale ahead to the best version of this team, who is more, we know Paolo's he's head and shoulders above both those guys. Is there a chance that like Jalen Suggs is the second most important player to that franchise right now, or is that still very clear? Not even clearly, but is that still to you, Franz?
I think it's Franz, but it's close because the way that I look at it, I know basically what Jalen's ceiling is, and it's a very good ceiling. It's a very high level role player ceiling. But for me, that's Franz's floor if the jumper doesn't improve by like a lot. It still has to improve a little bit. But Franz has like really high sort of, I see it as sort of second option ceiling if the jumper improves, because he's so good at all these other things that he can already be like a high level role player for another team, rebounds, defense, playmaking, etc. Like one of the things about this team is that whenever things get out of hand, most of the time the ATO is Franz running something, whether it's isolation, pick and roll, whatever it is, because of how he is able to calm down that offense relative to the other guys on the floor.
Did you see the balloons fly across my screen? I have no idea what's going on. Right. Happy birthday to whoever's listening or watching this, and it's their birthday. That's why those popped up.
Yes, happy birthday, person. So I wouldn't say that he's usurped him, but I do think that because of what like Jalen has this like kind of known ceiling. So you could see a scenario where if they don't see like the kinds of improvements from Franz that make him an ideal piece next to Paolo, they look at trading him because he has that value as, again, high level role player for like basically any other team because of like how versatile he is in like all the ways that he impacts the game on a consistent basis. But I wouldn't say that he's less important. And it would also be dependent on like, is there somebody that we like wanted to come and get from the outside? But I would still say that Franz is the second most important player in terms of creating the best version of this team, especially because if you aren't even looking at the offense defensively, everything that he unlocks for this team is crazy because you can run, quote unquote, like Magic style small ball lineups, include Franz at the 3. I don't think they ever play him at the 4 because they never play Paolo at 5.
Which is funny because when he was coming out of the draft, I questioned whether he could be a full-time 3 in the NBA, and I was clearly wrong. I mean,
he
like,
plays the 2 in their jumbo
right. I mean,
lineups, and
just like he's a wing defender and does really well. So
he was
I might
really
lean
good on
Suggs.
Donovan Mitchell one-on-one. But I was just like, he just slides his feet so well. Again, 6'10", great wingspan. He's just got really good instincts. He's just like solid
I
and
might
big,
lean
which
I
makes
might
him great.
I might lean Suggs, but that might be more of a recency bias. And I love chaotic players. And there's just like an embraceable anarchy to the way that Jalen Suggs plays, particularly on defense. But they're both extension eligible this year. Their maxes in year 1 could be $38.8 million. So I'm just going to throw 2 numbers at you. If they come into extension, their agents come into extension negotiations and say, we want this number, or if you think they'd be worth more. I think Franz's people would push for the max. Would you give Franz the max at 38.5?
Here's the thing is I would, based on the current CBA, but the Orlando Magic front office is very weird. And as an Orlando Magic fan, I particularly don't trust them. I was pretty shocked and like pleasantly surprised when they gave Jamahl Mosley that extension. It sort of seemed like and was read as a signal that they're ready to transition into a new era where they care about team stability and like properly building a high quality competitive basketball team. However, that is not how they've operated throughout my entire life in terms of the front office moves. And so I would give Franz the 38 million as the 38 million a year rookie scale extension because of the current CBA, the media deal coming up, etc. Like I'm just like, oh, that's not that bad. But I don't know that they would, especially because of all these improvements that I think Franz needs to make in order for, I think, most NBA front offices to see him as a, rookie max scale extension player. So I think that it'll probably be another year before they end up working out a deal. Personally,
I would agree with you.
Because they're just like, show us.
Yeah, and I think one of the things is too, if he was to hit, let's just say he was a restricted free agent right now, and that the numbers were still the same. There are teams out there that would give him I think it's a 4-year, 173.7 max, and the Magic, I think that can go up to 5 years and like 225 almost. If they wait, I think it might be a prove it thing. It might also be, well, we didn't do anything massive or seismic this summer, and we want to make sure that we're working with a lower cap hold before we re-sign you, because maybe next summer we try and strike, which I would be against because I think they need to do it now. But Jalen Suggs, so the over-under number I gave you for him was 27.5.
Yeah. Honestly, my brain is like, again, I'm a primarily Nuggets person. So I think in terms of like how the CBA affects the Nuggets, but then the Magic are in a bit of a different place. They're not worried about like, second apron implications for that. So my initial thought was, I think I got to wait on it. But when you look at how much he improved his shooting, when you look at what an absolute menace he was defensively, this kid's a hard worker. He cares about the game a lot. There's no questions there. The character aspect of the team fit is absolutely there. I would almost say just give it to him, because when you look at what he could become in terms of just a 3-and-D player that literally every team could use, you don't want to end up in a situation where you're competing with other teams for it. But my GM brain also goes, well, we could always offer him more than other teams anyway, so maybe we wait until restricted free agency. And my brain is like, I don't trust the Atlanta Magic front office to do the just like, let's just make the team good things. And so I would do it, but I don't know that they would. I don't think they will this year either, but I think there's arguments even from the GM perspective to do it, because you're like, this kid's so good. If he gets any better, the market could be steeper than we want.
Right. And that's like far enough away from the max, though, to where I would just want to sign it, because if he gets onto the restricted free agency and someone gives it to him. So I'm with you. I would give it to him. I I think these guys should sign extensions because if I'm the Magic, I'm looking at this offseason as the offseason. But this is my next question for you. They have what I've grown to call your choose your own adventure cap sheet. Like, depending on how you value their own free agents, they can have anywhere between like 20 plus million or like they could go past 60 million pretty easily. Do you think, I'm starting to think that the answer from you is no, based off what you just said, that the front office is going to operate with a semblance of, if it's not urgency, then aggression this offseason, not just because they have these tools at their disposal, but, oh, hey, we're really good.
So the answer isn't no, but it's that I don't know. Definitely not aggression. I don't see them making a particularly aggressive move this offseason because there are still so many questions about all of the young players on this roster that it's not really about like, well, we could be like a conference finals team, which they could be anyway, because they could just get better next year. But I do think that there are specific moves that they can make that aren't necessarily aggressive, but urgently address the need to answer some of the questions about the young players on this roster. Something that we talked about already. We talked about the shooting, and we talked about the need for maybe a floor general as well. And so I think that there's like a range with both of those directions, and maybe they try to get both in terms of like going for like the star that could give you this thing versus like a more marginal piece, whether it's in free agency or a small trade to, you know, fill either of or both of those roles.
Is there, it's a stupid question when it comes down to it, because if you're there, you're not going to sign, if you're signing like an elite playmaker, the chances are they're probably a pretty good shooter too. But like, what do you
Right.
view as the more urgent need for them? Is it to improve the functional shooting around them, or it's, oh, we need someone who is not Cole Anthony, not Paolo Banchero, not Markelle Fultz to organize our offense?
I 100% think that if there's only one thing they can do, they should address getting a floor general. Because to me, the shooting was definitely a problem, especially for the way that teams were defending both Paolo and Franz. Both of them also need to improve their own individual shooting. However, the bigger problem to me was the frequency with which everyone on this team turned the ball over. I remember it was like game 2 against the Cavs, and I think Paolo and Jalen had 5 turnovers each in the first quarter. It was a problem. And it continues to be a problem. It's a problem. They're, I believe, 23rd in turnover rate on the season. I remember looking this up because the Phoenix Suns were worse. And I was like, how are you worse than the Magic?
They were
And
like, they came, I think they led the league, or maybe it was Memphis, which would make sense because their roster was changing every night. They were in the top, I'll say they were in the top 3 of turnovers from just stepping out of bounds,
oh
which
my
is just
God,
like,
there's a
when you're
lot of
talking,
dumb turnovers too. Yeah.
when you're talking about
Like
hitting the
not just
play
the live
better
ball stuff,
button
which are also
or the play smarter button, that's what you mean. It's like, hey, maybe don't step out of bounds as frequently as you were.
right. But the live ball turnovers are a really big problem. Like you said, just the half court pace, getting into their sets, getting guys in the best positions to succeed. Um, One of the things that they need to address with both Paolo and Franz, like you said, like what's the next frontier for Paolo? What are the ways that Franz would need to improve to get to the point where the front office feels comfortable giving him this the max extension is getting somebody on the floor that you feel comfortable is going to get to say the 80 or 90th percentile outcome on every possession when it comes to organizing the offense, seeing what Franz and Paolo are going to do when they are put in positions to succeed, right? And if I learned anything from this regular season, from the Nuggets to basically any team I watch, it's the importance of point guards, not just ball handlers, not just like a combo guard, but your primary decision maker and the initiator, the guy who's handling the ball. Whether it, like I said, even the Nuggets, like Jokic is great, but you need your point guard to make everything flow to like its optimal level. And I think that watching the Magic this year was like the most maybe not the most, because there are definitely worse teams. One of the most glaring examples of the need for particularly these younger teams to have someone that they trust. Joe Ingles was their backup point guard off the bench. He actually did a really good job of calming the offense and just like running basic actions. Also spelling both Paolo and Franz when only one of them was on the floor, so that they weren't constantly having to initiate too. But he's not like amazing, right? But
he's also 80.
He could get everybody in their spots and run basic pick and roll. Also like a good connective passer, etc., things like that. And so it's like, well, I wish they had I wish they could get Mike Conley. Like, he's like ideal because he also provides the shooting, but will play off ball, but also play on ball, and like everything gets chaotic. But the name that a lot of people have been floating around for over a year now is Anthony Simons. He's not like the best decision maker, but he's okay. And he provides that shooting. So in terms of finding someone that gets you that combo, but there are other options that, like Tyus Jones, or if they could pick up Kyle Lowry on either a minimum or a low level deal, just to have someone there as that option. So you could still play your starting lineup the way that you like to, but you can also mix and match, and you create these like really, like I said, they like to go with these jumbo lineups, and it creates like absolute havoc defensively for opposing teams. But then it's like, okay, we can't score because one, they don't respect our spacing, and two, like we don't know what to do here. So Kyle Lowry is an option. People have been floating Darius Garland as an option as well. He also provides some of the shooting, although like his willingness to shoot is like a question for me. I actually think he could really thrive with the Magic when he's surrounded by a bunch of really good play finishers.
Yeah.
And guys that would take pressure off of him offense. Like, the thing with the Magic is that a lot of them are really good at getting open off the ball, but they're not good at doing that while like kind of alternating possessions, being the guy that's initiating and trying to set other guys up too. So I actually think that, yeah, floor general is the absolute priority, and I think that should be prioritized over overshooting. I do think that Klay Thompson has been floated. I don't love the idea because it eats into what you could do to get a really good point guard, but I think he could be like decent off the bench, and this team could use some like movement shooting. They did draft Jet Howard last year. He didn't really play much. Yeah. I don't know if the questions were like, what about defensively, blah, blah, blah. Maybe he gets better this year, but
I actually watched for something I was writing some Jet Howard G League tape.
Oh, nice.
He is someone that I thought, that's not a brag. My point was, for what they needed, I don't know why they just didn't try him out more. Just after watching how he was moving and navigating the floor, I don't understand why he wasn't part of especially when it's like that was what they needed. Like, it's not like he would have infringed upon someone else who was really important minutes. Like, you could
and he's 6'8". That's another thing, is like, I don't want Klay Thompson because I think they should just give more run to Jet Howard, right?
And also, like, wouldn't at this point, like, and maybe they'd be cheaper if they are. I don't know what the market's saying, but like, I would prefer to have next season, for the next couple seasons, Buddy Hield or even Malik Beasley based off what he showed this season, as opposed to a Klay Thompson.
I actually wouldn't mind Buddy Hield because he comes from an offense in Indiana anyway that plays in a lot of really creative ways in the way that they run their sets and everything. I think he could actually really thrive with some of the things that the Magic do, because like you said, like Jamahl Mosley actually does really creative things with their offense, but other teams don't respect their spacing. They end up like inverting. They like to invert the offense a lot, and they, like other teams, absolutely do not respect the shooting of Paolo or Franz and things like that. But having somebody like Buddy out there, he's also a really smart player. Like, he can, he sets like really good screens off the ball, and he can read the floor sort of mid broken possession. Like, oh, but I can get this guy open, or like set this flare screen and get myself open, and we can kind of save this. So actually that could be interesting, but again, I wouldn't prioritize it over the floor general.
Simons is probably my favorite trade or free agent target for them, even though I think I agree with you.
He's trying to save Anthony, which is also fair.
Right. But also I could see them going the route of, and I don't necessarily think he kind of checks in the same vein as, well, he doesn't check any box primarily, but like a Malcolm Brogdon, if they're going to go the placeholder route, like has 1 year on his deal. I actually
There's
like
someone I actually thought that the Magic might take a go at the trade deadline, but they didn't.
Right. And another name I thought of, just because his contract is so friendly, and I really think he's better than people are giving him credit for. I know Atlanta sucks, but DeJounte Murray on that deal, like, I know he's not the best shooter, but like he's an upgrade over Markelle Fultz.
He was a lot better this last year.
Right.
My thing is the decision making. Like, I just prioritize that so much more
That's
than
fair.
anything else. And I think he plays really well with a lob threat. This team doesn't actually have that many of them for a team with so many big guys. So he wouldn't be ideal, but he's on a good deal. He's on a good contract. And yeah, he could provide definitely that spacing and some more off the dribble juice. Like, he can just break down defenses quite a bit better than any of the guards that Orlando has right now. So not a bad option.
Among their could be free agents, Jonathan Isaac, his contract will be guaranteed, but like Mo Wagner's team option, I'm assuming is just going to be picked up. But looking at Joe Ingles, Gary Harris, Goga Batadze, are there any of their free agents or could be free agents that you view as like, oh, these guys need to, or if I had my preference, they would stick around?
So my thing is, if they end up not getting a floor general, I think they have to, like, I would be upset if they didn't keep Joe Ingles. But if they do, then you can kind of let him go. I mean, he's going to be not like, I don't know, sought after by like a lot of teams, but he's still a decent player. He's, sorry about that, known as a good locker room guy, all of those things. He can still run pick and roll. And the volume isn't there, but he can still hit a shot every now and then, right? I think Mo Wagner should absolutely be re-signed. I don't know that they're going to pick up his team option. They probably won't, so that they maintain the most flexibility in free agency.
If they decline that team option, then don't do something absolutely nuclear. The yelling that is going to take
That's
place.
The thing is, like, if they decline the team option, they have to have a plan to use that $8 million that his salary is taking up off the cap, and they still have lots of space outside of that. So honestly, I would just pick it up because I think the $8 million is fair. I wish the Nuggets had Wagner. He provides so much energy. He's a great connective piece. Gives them that lineup.
Like, what was that game? Was that game 4? What was it against Cleveland? He like had these like massive plays off the dribble too. Like, just let me just bust out this attack going downhill.
Yeah, we had like, the thing is, like, FIBA Mo Wagner just translated throughout the entire rest of the Magic season. He was terrific for Team Germany last summer. So maybe they decline it and then try to sign him for like a little bit less. But I just think he's like a super solid backup center. He's Franz's brother, all of that stuff. So, you know, vibes. I don't know if the Magic front office cares about that, but I think they should, because this team has good vibes and they should want to maintain those.
Anything I didn't ask you about, or someone or something we didn't discuss with this team that you think needs to be touched
on? No, just I wanted to just kind of commend Jamahl Mosley for what he built with this team over the past now couple of years. But like the way that everyone buys into the defense and how much these young players care so much about the game and trying to win, etc. I just think he made me sort of go back and question some of the things I thought about what actually makes a good coach. I tend to prioritize offensive execution and organization when evaluating coaches. But, you know, now that I know defense is important, and also culture and just building buy-in with players. I think that he earned his, what was it, 3rd in Coach of the Year status. So I wanted to commend him and also give the Orlando Magic a little bit of credit for their front office extending him and wanting to keep that going.
All right, NBA Finals talk time. Game 1 is in the books, with the exception of, it wasn't a faux comeback. The Mavericks came back in the 3rd quarter of Game 1, but then they were pretty much shellacked throughout the entire game, basically. Leading into Game 2, Want to get into that with you and your thoughts on what you've already seen, your takeaways, and some adjustments that you could see moving forward. I did want to start, however, with Kristaps Porzingis just coming back and having the half quarter of his life when he checks in at the 7-12 mark of the first quarter.
That's
We
right. He
didn't
came off the bench. I forgot.
Right. And he did things that we know he could shoot over players who were smaller than him. Go figure. He can kind of protect the basket. But were you as shocked? I was awestruck at how he was dominant. He just 38 days out, comes back. You're in the NBA finals, and he just absolutely killed it. What did you make of his performance in game one and just the value of, I guess, what he's doing to the Celtics as you look ahead to the rest of the series?
Yeah, he looked incredibly spry. There was one of two ways that this could go with him coming off of he hadn't played basketball in over a month because of the calf strain. He could have been super rusty and or still who knows what lingering stuff might be there, or he was going to look incredibly rested and just ready to go. And it was definitely the latter. His mismatch attacking and the decisiveness of it. He was really quick to, it's not like he was attacking off the catch, but he was I'm going to immediately size up my defender and immediately force them to react to me. And that really, he wasn't letting Dallas off the hook. So, and like you said, the rim protection, he had how many of his blocks were just in that first quarter stint too? He had that transition block on Josh Green, and I was like, Josh, you're gonna get blocked here. What are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? And then he tries to dunk it, and Kristaps is really just kind of backpedaling, jogging back, getting ready to get in position for that block. But then he got it. He met it right at the apex, right before.
I mean, it's that's a I am over 7 feet tall.
Yeah,
block. That was that type
exactly. And he altered many more shots than that on all of the Mavericks. They had a really tough time finishing in the paint. I really thought that this series was going to look quite a bit closer to the OKC series because I knew that Kristaps was going to provide that rim protection as well, even though Boston sort of switched up the matchups in a way that was a little bit different than OKC did for most of that series. But he came in from the weak side, and it wasn't just weak side blocks. It was a lot of weak side altering shots and just mucking everything up around the rim that I think was even more impactful than the scoring, although the scoring was really big because I actually think that if Dallas wants to have any chance in this series, it has to be defensively.
The other story of that game was just Boston's defense in general. When you look at Dallas's, the lobs, of course, those are taken away, but their inability to generate the types of looks that they've become accustomed to. They were leading the playoffs in corner 3-point frequency. They took 3 total corner 3-point attempts in game one. Boston did a great job of coaxing more above the break looks. And there was no one person where it was super high volume, but it was we'll let Derek Jones Jr. or PJ Washington or Jaden Hardy take those looks. They threw, aside from actual blitzing, they did everything that you could imagine against Luka Doncic, where it was, sometimes or they switched. They had guys stay on him. They also there were points, and Luka did, go after, I think it was Al Horford, and he hits a 3 over him. But they were willing, just not in high volume, to have their bigs on him at points. What did you just make though of Boston's overall defensive approach? I think a lot of people came away from that game, or at least some of the stuff I read and listened to was, well, Dallas is going to hit some of their better shots. Kyrie Irving will hit more of their shots. Kyrie Irving will play better. I think there is some of that to an extent, but I came away from that, and maybe this is me living in the moment too much of game one, but I'm how the fuck is Dallas supposed to solve any of this?
I think that I didn't expect Dallas to struggle this much offensively against Boston. Game one was truly the best defensive performance I've seen from Boston the entire playoffs. And it was because of how sharp they were on everything. They mixed up the matchups, right? Everyone's talking about how they put Jason Tatum on Kristaps to sort of, or on Lively, and put Kristaps on PJ to sort of neutralize the Luka Lively pick and roll. Did Dallas have any lob dunks in this game? No, right?
I think they had one attempt. I don't know, and maybe it was a miss if I'm mistaken.
Yeah. I think there was was that a pass? or was floater, and then Lively like cleaned up the offensive.
That's a testament that you talked about Kristaps like detouring shots, and just like you saw it with Kyrie and Luka a couple times, just the way that they kind of bailed out on when they were going downhill.
Yeah. No, I think that the story of this game can really be told in comparing the impact of Gafford and Lively to Al Horford and Kristaps. Because Kristaps, as impactful as he was, the fact that Al Horford was able to hold up enough on switches onto Luka meant that Dallas didn't have to change their game plan at any point in the game, whether Kristaps was on the floor or not, because like I said, they had Kristaps on PJ, Jason on Lively, and they were like, we're just going to switch everything now. So the lack of like overall 3-point attempts is because they were making it difficult for Luka to get to the step back from his left, I believe, which is like the way that he tends to like to go. And Al, I think, did a good job on the perimeter with that for the most part. Although I think Luka did hit one over him, like you said.
He's like, I mentioned this a bunch of times, but like Al Horford's weird where I would trust him more if he has to cover someone who's going to try and torch him laterally or going downhill. But like, if you can just generate separation with your step back, he just doesn't feel as equipped to guard those guys anymore.
I agree. Like, I don't want him on anybody shifty. Right. But I actually thought he did like well enough on Kyrie. My thing with Kyrie is that he does need to play better, but it's not just about making shots, although he did miss a lot of open shots in this game. I just thought his process was terrible, especially in those non-Luka minutes. Like, he does need to carry those units, and it's not like he's playing with 4 starters, but like watching them play, like, do they even know like how to run offense or what they want to do on a given possession? No. I watched Sam Hauser like deny Kyrie the ball for an entire possession that ended in like a
Sam Hauser guarding Luka at points too, unafraid.
I know. And then Sam forced that Kyrie miss off the backboard from the corner.
The Braun corner 3,
like, oh my gosh, what is happening right now? But the process on this possession is what I was most not concerned with, because I've seen Dallas not solve this before, but have better process even against good defenses. And so I do think that they are going to play better in game 2, but I don't even think Boston played particularly well in game 1, except again, defensively. But I think that Dallas didn't really pressure them too much with how they were approaching offense. It wasn't just like, oh, Luka needs to make more shots to force them to change their plan. There are other ways that that Dallas can sort of try to adjust or try to punish what Boston is doing defensively that they just didn't go to in this first game. So yeah, I think the level of discombobulation by the Dallas Mavericks was something I did not expect in this series. However, the discombobulation of their defense against the way that Boston likes to play offense, it was much expected. And so kudos on Boston for just like taking advantage of literally every single mistake or breakdown by the Mavericks. One of the things I noticed when my watching back on the film of this game was just like, I was originally concerned with like, oh, I hate this scheme. Like, Dallas is allowing too many threes, etc. But going back and watching it, it's like, man, 75% of these possessions were just like bad communication, mistimed help, soft switching instead of like do a real switch. Like, you're guarding this guy now. Don't just like kind of drop back or like let him blow by you immediately. And it was Luka, but it was Kyrie, it was everybody that needs to play on a string a lot better if they're going to continue the way that they're guarding. I don't know if Kid is going to hit the, okay, we're making a massive adjustment button in game 2, or if he's going to hit the, you guys need to play better and execute this thing better before I can even think about trying to change up what we're doing.
Do you think there's anything too, though, when you're looking at, they struggle at points with ball containment too, and then you're talking about the help defense and particularly around the basket, when they haven't gone up against a true 5-out team in these playoffs. And then when you look at where some of these, I mean, specifically Kristaps Porzingis can sling it from, you're so stretched out that it's going to be tough if it's an actual big who has to close out on Porzingis, or if it's going to be like one of your other players. Like, they're not going to be able to like they either have to shoot those gaps or going to be further away on the closeouts, or if they're tasked with helping because actions are happening behind them, that's more ground that they're going to have to cover going south at that point. And I don't know. And I don't know what the defensive adjustment is. Like, do you see, and you mentioned the bad process, but do you see anything they could try? Is it even lineup wise? I know you had tweeted about they should try playing Derek Lively and Kleba more together. They've barely played together this season, part because of injuries. And Derek Lively was in foul trouble. But
he got 5 fouls in the third quarter.
Honestly impressive.
It's a very rookie game, like the most rookie game that I've seen from Lively the entire playoffs.
Which is because he is a rookie, and we kind of forget that because he's just been so good, basically wire to wire, and specifically during the playoffs. But is there anything you just look at that Jason Kidd maybe should try or move to? Is this gonna? I think a lot of people have latched onto the idea that this might need to be a Maxi Kleba series, and in terms of stretching out Boston's defense even more, and then maybe opening up lane, like. I think if Dallas is going to win this series, honestly, we can talk about, they need someone like a PJ Washington to maybe force Boston into rotation a little bit more, like do things off the dribble rather than just, or be more of a screen setter. But it really, to me, is just going to come down to like Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving need to figure out a way how to really prop up the offense one-on-one. So Maxi Kleba to me would help there, just the extra spacing he creates. You of course do lose the lob threat in that unless you're playing with him with a Lively, but he's also not like shooting threes in high volume since he came back. And so I'm genuinely asking you, do you see anything that like Dallas should try? Because you mentioned maybe not trying anything drastically different, and perhaps a better process and decision-making will help them. I left that game kind of at a loss for what I think Dallas can do on the offensive end.
Right. No, I completely agree. And it's because I didn't really expect Dallas to struggle this much offensively, given what the Celtics were doing, because I really just thought that it would end up in a situation where Boston was going to switch a lot. I was expecting that because that's what they like to do. They're going to try out their base scheme, see if it works out. And it did, for the most part. But I also think that Luka and Kyrie can improve their process when they have those switches. I also think the bigs could play better. I don't think that as great of a rebounder that Jason Tatum is, and I talked about this in our series preview, how important it is that Jason Tatum is as high a level of a rebounder as he is, because he effectively allows the Celtics to play small ball, because he is a power forward, but he doesn't really play like a power forward, but he does enough power forward things at a really high level that the bigs don't have as much of a burden on this team. As great as Kristaps is and as good as Al Horford is, the fact of having to like constantly set screens, constantly rebound, just et cetera, things that 4s and 5s do, puts a lot of pressure on these guys who are a little bit older. And so Jason Tatum allows them to play this way because he's so good at those things. But Derek Lively should not be consistently getting bullied out of the way by Jason Tatum for both offensive and defensive rebounds. Daniel Gafford, I think he had a couple of offensive rebounds in this game, but he was getting absolutely bullied, and really it was fouling, but that wasn't being called, by Jrue Holiday. But like, look, it's not about like, Jrue is a really good post defender. I'm like, Daniel Gafford, you are an undersized center, but you are still like 6'9" or whatever, and incredibly athletic. When you're on the floor, you have the best vertical of anybody on the floor. You cannot let Jrue Holiday push you from underneath the basket into the stanchion so that you cannot grab rebounds. That has to be one of the ways the Dallas punishes the switching, both on the offensive end. Defensively, they need to continue to. I think their defensive rebounding was mostly fine in this game, although Boston got a lot. It was a lot of like long rebounds off threes in
the first quarter where Boston got like 4.
It was like 3. Yeah, it was like half. I'm like, wait, half of these were on one possession. I think Dallas did a decent job most of the rest of the time, even though Boston had them in rotation a lot. And the offensive rebounds that Boston got were in really key moments too. So when you said it wasn't a fake comeback, I'm like, well, it kind of was. They ran out of gas and then they couldn't keep executing. And so I think it was like 2 offensive rebounds in a row that started to push the Boston lead back up again. And then they got their offensive process back on track after just sort of playing Boston ball for like a 5-minute stretch while the Mavs went on like a 29-9 run or whatever it was. But I agree with you. Like, I did not expect them to struggle this much offensively. So a lot of the the adjustments that I predicted Dallas would have to make had more to do with the defensive end, because I thought their defense would be really just completely ineffectual against the way that Dallas likes to play, or that Boston likes to play, because Dallas likes to pack the paint. But when you look at the actual numbers, like Dallas had a really good rating, defensive rating in the half court, like 98. It was worse than what their offensive rating was overall in the game, like 97, because Boston's defense was even better. But they were getting absolutely crushed in transition, like 188 offensive rating for the Celtics in transition. And so I actually do think that the offense is the bigger problem. And then defensively, there are a lot of execution things that Dallas needs to clean up. Kristaps is a problem. You talked about my double big suggestion. It's something that they did in the Clippers series for reasons that had nothing to do with a Kristaps-like player on the floor. But it was really about allowing Lively or Gafford to stay at the rim whenever like one of them was on the floor, or Kleba whenever they switch somebody onto the big to try to neutralize that pick and roll game between Harden and Zubac. Now, it's not like Boston's not a high volume pick and roll team, but they run a lot of like pick and pops with Kristaps, and he's involved in off ball screening options, etc. If you end up in a situation where you can neutralize one of their more efficient actions that say involves Tatum and Kristaps, because you can switch Kleba in that situation and then keep Lively on whoever is in the dunker spot. I know Boston does a lot of things to kind of keep players moving so that you basically have to be in rotation, because the guy who maybe wants to stay in the dunker spot, in this case, let's say it's Lively, has to also watch out for the fact that, oh, they're swapping places here. This guy's in the dunker spot now, and now that shooter is like darting out to the corner or darting out to the wing on a particular action. And that's where like the communication and just execution aspect comes in. But I think in terms of not letting Kristaps get those easier switches could really help. In the second half, they were doing a lot more of trying to keep Lively on Kristaps to try to make sure that those switches weren't happening. But then Boston was able to create threes because whoever was guarding the ball handler had to either chase, and the guys were getting downhill and collapsing the defense, etc. Or often when it was Luka, he was playing a lot further back and trying to play in kind of a drop. But the thing with Boston is that all these guys have like a super green light. Like they are ready to shoot. One of the problems that OKC had was they have all these like really smart decision makers, but they are a little bit too hesitant to take the good shot when they think they could get a better shot by driving into traffic and trying to, I don't know, further collapse the defense. And so I don't think they're like, they missed shots, but I think they also were not taking a lot of shots that were available because of the way that Dallas was defending them. And I compare them to Boston because both of them try to play 5 out, but the Thunder's 5 out is a lot of like constantly drive and kick, and everybody wants to keep driving and kicking. But with Boston, they're like, oh, first open 3-point opportunity, we're gonna take this, make or miss. Let's go.
I've seen though a lot of, and there was like, I can't remember the specific time breakdown, but it was like from the second quarter until the mark of when the starters were pulled in the fourth quarter, Dallas only lost the game by 3. And so it's like, all right, well, for like that's super cherry picked. But in the third quarter, they do go on that run. And when you go back and watch it, there was like Dallas's defense did seem on point, and it seemed like they had more of a game plan on how to defend the 3-point line or how to get guys off the 3-point line.
Yeah.
You had kind of alluded to this. I can't remember if you were talking about the third quarter specifically. The way they were defending, because they were still just in constant rotation and flux, they just ran out of gas. Is there anything though that they were doing during that mini stretch?
They didn't change too much about their scheme, except, like I said, just trying to keep Lively like pressed up on Kristaps so that Boston wasn't getting those easy points. And then the Celtics just kind of, they forced some other switches and took guys in ISO, but they weren't, there was like a little bit of better ball containment, but they were kind of getting open threes off of not paint touches. So it was just better containment, and then not letting Kristaps get the easy stuff, even from like the mid range on those like face ups on like a mismatch on a small. But I think they could protect the rim better too, because what ended up happening after like Missoula eventually calls a timeout because he's like, we can't let this happen. Um, Eventually calls a timeout after like a 29-9 run, whatever. Was the Celtics were like, oh no, we have to touch the paint on every possession and then we can generate better threes. Okay, good. And then they did that. They got their threes. They got their shots at the rim, etc. I think when Lively and Gafford can figure out a way to spend more time closer to the rim, the rest of the Dallas defenders aren't as concerned with collapsing, or at least they shouldn't be. So they're able to stay home on shooters a little bit better. So I do think that if you can get somebody else that you trust to be on Kristaps, like Kleba, just because of his size, and who can also switch onto all of the Boston ball handlers in all of those off-ball actions that they like to run for Kristaps, then you can have like sort of best of both worlds defensively. But it's all experimental because we haven't actually seen too much of it. They ran it for like a really, really small stint in that third quarter. And I don't think it's what propelled their run, but I thought it was an interesting look that they should, just try out a little bit more.
Is there anything in particular you'll be watching to see from because in theory, they really shouldn't change much, if anything, but looking at Boston, is there anything you're just trying to see if they do better or that they might change heading into game 2 and beyond?
I think that they'll probably blitz Luka a little bit more.
Okay.
In part because throughout the game 1, they did try a couple of different looks, especially depending on if the lineup included both Luka and Kyrie or just one of those guys. I think they're just gonna, and when I say a little bit more, like they didn't really blitz at all, maybe on like 2 possessions or something, entirety of game 1. I think they'll just throw it in a little bit more to give them a different look and just keep Dallas off balance. Besides that, I thought defensively, they don't have too much to solve because the Mavs haven't really done anything on offense so far to make them rethink what they're doing. So there's no real reason to adjust there. I think that Peyton Pritchard can be a little bit better than he was in game 1. It wasn't just shooting. Like he just looked very uncomfortable on both ends of the floor. He did like hold up decently on a couple of possessions on Luka or whatever, but just watching him play, he usually plays with a lot more confidence, like knows exactly what he's going to do. There was just a lot of hesitation in this game and he wasn't making shots and he was just like, oh, what do I do? I'm stuck because like there was good ball containment in this possession. Like, what do we do? Like, just kind of get the ball moving a little bit faster and that kind of thing. But other than that, I thought everyone played like pretty well. Jalen Brown was awesome in this game, and guys made shots. Like, so it's really on Dallas now to force the Celtics to have to play better.
I am wondering, I thought he had a good overall game, and you already mentioned his rebounding. If there's something that can be done or needs to be done to maybe make things a little bit easier on Jason Tatum. I think the value is in the attention he draws. I thought he did make some good passes. I thought Dallas did a good job at points of getting the ball out of his hands. I'm wondering if the Celtics, I know they want to have the ball in his hands, but if you're going to do that, can you maybe set some ball screens even higher for him? Or can you do things off the ball? You maybe set more pin downs for him to come off of. They won without him having just this monster offensive performance. I'm just like kind of picking nits here because I don't even.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like he's better. It's easier for him when he's able to operate off the ball and attack downhill, say off the catch. He often just goes for the 3 because if he's
that's the other thing too. Is like if when Luka's on you, like you don't gotta take the step back. Like you can maybe try and like
So that's something that Dallas sort of is probably going to try to go to more, try to goading Boston into more isolations. But I don't know, like they were fine with Tatum having this like mid game because he didn't have like a super high usage in it and everybody else was efficient. He was creating for them. He did have 6 turnovers in the game. So that's like the plus when you like for Dallas, they're like, oh, we collapsed the defense a lot and we forced a lot of turnovers. Like, so that's, a plus to back in the paint, but he also made a lot of great reads. And
still lost by almost 20. So it's like
a bunch of his kickouts, either led to an open 3 or just led to like a really solid drive and kick sequence that ended in a good shot for somebody. So Tatum could play better, but I thought he played really well. Like, especially when you look at the burden that he has guarding Lively and or Gafford on any given possession and having to make sure that they don't get beat up on the offensive rebounds. I don't know. I just think he had a really great game. So
they don't need him to have a better one because
yeah.
But something I'll be watching. Is there anything else we haven't talked about that you think needs to be discussed?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about the Celtics offense. Like NBA Twitter has had a lot of thoughts about the Celtics offense as a whole, and they're so reliant on threes, so they end up with a low floor because if they have a bad shooting night, so on and so forth. But watching this game in particular, it was very clear to me that the like 25th percentile outcome for the Celtics is so high. It's not their floor because again, bad shooting night could be bad. But their 25th percentile outcome is very, very good because teams are so afraid of their three-point shot that you have to defend them a certain way. Dallas has had so much success packing the paint and guarding the rim and making teams have bad offensive nights because of that. But with Boston, even on a mid shooting night, like they weren't like amazing last night. It was still like 40% from three or something as a team. But even on nights where they shoot,
like they shot well from three overall, but
yeah,
people were talking about it like it was a barrage of threes. And like, no, that was like that was a regular Thursday for Boston, basically.
Right. It was a barrage in the first half. And part of that's because they had so many attempts, like 27 attempts. I don't care what the scheme is or the level of execution is from Dallas. You cannot allow any team to have 27 attempts from three in the first half, unless it's the Orlando Magic. The teams are so afraid of that three-point shot that it opens up so much else in the paint. So even though I don't really trust the Celtics to, say, make semi-contested twos at a high enough rate to beat like a team that is running offense competently, like that's not what the Mavericks did in game one, by the way. But they'll get a lot of decent looks from two just because of how willing they are to take these transition threes and things that they get because the other team is like messing up on their offense. Right. So that's just like philosophically something that I was thinking about with respect to the Celtics offense watching this game.
Yeah, they ended up shooting. They were 15 of 15 in the restricted area in this game, which is just like, that's not necessarily
not something that most teams do against the Mavericks or many teams did in the playoffs. Right.
And it's just, I'm wondering, I will be interesting to see if there are any schematic or personnel or whatever tactical adjustments from the Mavericks, because it just feels like, and I had mentioned this during the game, is that there's a chance we might look back on this Celtics team as an inevitability that we, not necessarily me and you, but definitely me, collectively tried to paint as something less, because I'm just watching this Dallas
I'm
defense.
definitely in that too.
Right. I'm just watching this Dallas defense, which has been so good since the trade deadline. And I'm not smart enough to say that I should have the fixes, but the fact that I just can't really point to anything and say Boston's offense or the way that their personnel won't stretch them beyond the point of functioning at a high level is just absolutely wild. And so like Boston is just, I don't know, they're actually literally #built different. Like, and so they will have the games, you mentioned the low floor. There will be variance when you're taking threes, but as you mentioned, it opens up all this other stuff. And by the way, we have not seen them really in the postseason without like Kristaps Porzingis being healthy and moving the way that he was. And it was funny afterwards, by the way, he's like, I didn't even think I was 100% yet. And I was like, what the hell does 100% look like when you're moving with some of the stuff that you did? So I don't want to say it's hopeless for the Mavs because I picked against them, I think, in every series so far except the first round. So like I had them beating the Clippers and then I just had them losing to everybody else, the Thunder, the Timberwolves, and of course the Celtics. But I'm going to be fascinated to see if there's anything they can do, because I do feel like this series, after watching game one, maybe it's an overreaction, has the potential to kind of go off the rails for Dallas, just based off some of the stuff we saw.
For sure. I had this as Boston in 6, but I thought 5's possible, but I don't trust this Celtics team. But maybe they're just like super locked in. You could see that from their defense. They were like totally on a string with all of their communication, etc., throughout this entire game, which you need to be, because like I said, there are other ways that Dallas can punish you for the way that you're sort of messing with the matchups. But yeah, I think 5's possible. I still just don't see Dallas getting swept I'll be curious to see how they adjust, particularly offensively, which I was not expecting to have that big of a question for the Dallas offense, but that is the bigger concern for me now than the defense after seeing game one.
I'm sorry, I already can't remember if we like talked about this, but like, do you just see, we did this a little bit, but like, do you need to spam more of Derrick Jones Jr. or PJ Washington being used as the screener just to try and get the de facto big maybe involved in the action? Or is Boston going to, pre-switch that and it's not even going to matter?
So Boston's scheme is pretty similar to the scheme that they used in the March 1st game that they had against the Mavericks. And so I actually thought that would be something that Dallas would have to keep going to. That was one of my predictions for the series. But after watching game one, I actually think they should try to keep finding ways to use Lively and Gafford, because that vertical spacing threat is such an important part of maximizing Luka as an offensive threat, as an offensive weapon. And I think that their offense is just most potent, not just when you have that vertical spacing threat, but when you have somebody who has real roll gravity, because these other guys aren't going to collapse the defense. And Derrick Jones Jr. in particular has been making really bad decisions with the ball. I advocated for using him more as a roller in the Wolves series. But his short roll decision making and his like just roller decision making from the back half of that series through now has been less than ideal. So I do think that both Lively and Gafford just need to be more involved, because I think you're letting Boston off the hook if you do the thing that is a little bit more obvious, because those guys are just easier to guard. Yeah.
I'm kind of curious if this becomes, not that it won't be like that he can't necessarily play, but we kind of already saw it. He log 14 minutes and change in game one. Is this just, even looking at defensively, can this just not be a Daniel Gafford series? Because we saw him run into some issues against OKC too. And like, Boston's built in a similar way, but with better decision makers on the ball, or better attackers on the ball.
No, that's a really good point. And I actually thought that Gafford was pretty bad through the first part of the Wolves series as well. So I was just like, okay, they have one good center now, and they just need to survive the Gafford minutes. But as that series went on, he became a lot better. He was just playing smarter, making good decisions on the short roll, whereas he'd kind of just been like, I don't know, Euro stepping into three guys before. And then by the end of that series, they were like winning his minutes handily and losing Lively's. And maybe part of that's just like rookie stuff that I didn't even notice as that series went on. I think Kidd has, to a way that I appreciate, been very consistent with his rotations and trying to figure out ways to get the guys that are on the floor playing better and playing with, schemes that counter the other team. So I don't think that Gafford is going to be removed from the starting lineup, is the short answer to that. But I do think that they need to figure out a way to get him next to somebody bigger, whether that's Kleba or like, he just needs another front court partner, and he needs to play better. Because like I said, can't be bullied by Drew Holiday for the rest of the series, where it will be short, because they need their bigs to play well against this Boston team, because it's the only position that they really have an advantage outside of Luka.
Anything else you want to talk about before I finally, at long last, release you?
No, that was all. This was great. I love talking hoops.
Well, so do I, and thank you so much for coming on. I had a blast. Can you please just let our listeners know very quickly, in case they already forgot from the first part of the podcast, where they can find you and the fantastic work/tweets that you may be putting out?
Oh yeah, if you want my live game tweets and my not live game tweets, where I just offer my thoughts on all things hoops, you can find me on Twitter at ErinBurr27, ERINBURR27, and check out What's in a Game. It's What's in a Game NBA on YouTube. Me and my co-host talk about post-game stuff, but also check out our off-season gossip mongering too. We have a lot of trade slop that's going to be coming on. Lots and lots of rumors for every team.
I would just echo, go check out the What's in a Game podcast. The links will be in the YouTube and podcast description. Grace, thank you so much for your time. I'll definitely be pestering you again in the future.
Sweet.